Those who face eternity easily forget what a lifetime means, what an ending means.
You know it doesn't have to be this way.
No, Kunavine, it does. They need me.
Welcome to End of Dragons Daily 45. Today we'll be doing a topic I kind of half missed. I asked you guys to talk about the idea of factions, how much they might lean into this idea of the border and people fighting against one another, whether it will come with a World vs. World update, and yeah, I totally spaced on it. We did like 2 miscellaneous parts in a row, so that'll be the main topic for today. Also, this interesting comment here at the start from Krathor, who said, "Hey WP, I got an invitation from Arenanet to complete a survey about what I think of Guild Wars 2. It doesn't appear that everyone's received one, ... Have you? It could be a decent scoop considering that the likes of Blizzard use such surveys to decide what happened with the World of Warcraft Classic, although unfortunately they are emphatic about the actual survey questions being kept confidential. So I don't think I could actually share what I've asked or answered." Now, I asked this person if they were happy with me to spotlight this on the show. I haven't got a survey, or at least I haven't seen one so far. Maybe I need to check my email a little bit closer. You guys might like to as well. And yeah, this is kind of interesting, I suppose. It might influence End of Dragons somewhat, or the era after End of Dragons. I don't really know how much I believe it can affect serious change. I remember during the alphas, when you completed events or you did certain things, they would have this little pop-up in the top right underneath where the dynamic event would complete, asking you to rate your experience on a slider of 1 to 5, like how much fun you were having, how difficult it was and stuff. I remember filling in so many of those and feeling like none of them were ever being read or listened to, or I don't know, I'm sure it will get aggregated up somehow. Interesting idea, and honestly I'm excited by stuff like this. I don't remember them doing extensive survey stuff before Heart of Thorns or before POF, though obviously they had their beta/stress tests. That's an interesting topic we can come to for End of Dragons going up. Anyway, let's move over now. First message here from Ismail Sanabria. And my god, you guys, you're all very cynical when it comes to the topic of World vs. World. Maybe that's natural, maybe that makes sense. But goddamn, I don't think any faction stuff will get featured in the X-Pack. Look how ignored PvP and World vs. World have been for years. I think the devs figured out that most players don't even bother with those game modes. You could say that Stronghold is pretty much for Aspenwood from Guild Wars 1, but the devs literally just gave up on that after Heart of Thorns. Any factions implementation would just mean more of those PvP game modes, and sadly, most of the player base isn't interested in that. Well, it's funny, I actually kind of have the reverse opinion than you in some ways. I don't think PvP has been that ignored. The implementation of the mini-seasons, they've had consistent new maps throughout the years. Yes, Stronghold as a format on its own has definitely been pushed to the side and definitely feels weird. You know, I always feel very strange when I go to the PvP panel and I can look at like Churai Ossa and upgraded skin sets for Churai and stuff like that, knowing that it doesn't really mean anything and it didn't go anywhere. But the rest of PvP, I do think that they've done stuff. I do think they've been happy to offer new game types, and I wouldn't be surprised if End of Dragons did something similar. It's kind of like they've gone back on something they thought about Guild Wars 1. Guild Wars 1 had too many game types. They made Guild Wars 2 have just Conquest to kind of avoid that balance nightmare. And nowadays, there's a bunch of game types again, but they've got this idea that they shift you between them based on what mini-season or regular season it is. So I do think that the outlook is fairly positive for PvP. I think it has had the focus it needs. And I don't think the Stronghold is for Aspenwood at all, really. I mean, yeah, it's base assault and it's got the supply mechanic and the idea of NPCs assaulting. But that's really as far as it goes. The fundamental difference really between the two, if we're not talking about theme and, you know, where it's set and all that kind of stuff, which I appreciate is not really that relevant. You got to remember, Fort Aspenwood was specifically asymmetrical. It was very different being the Kurziks compared to being the Luxons, and there was no moment at which the Kurziks got to flip around. You were always on defense as a Kurzik, and you were always on offense as a Luxon. And, you know, that was how Jade Quarry was different, because Jade Quarry was a symmetrical map and was a symmetrical game type. Oh, synchronous word? Am I using the wrong word here? Is synchronous the word I should be using? So I do think that there are some big differences, and they could implement some Fort Aspenwood type stuff within World vs. World. You know, I look at World vs. World as so much more than just attacking towers and keeps if it wants to be. Look at Launch, where you had the idea of the orbs. and obviously that feature never ended up working that well. Those who are out of the loop, and I assume that there's quite a few of you at this point, it used to be that north of the camp, at the very north of the Alpine Borderlands, there was this shrine that you could go to, and you could collect an orb, you could fight over it, and if your team had it, one of the players in your Zerg could carry that orb to an objective, like one of the keeps where it would be well defended, and I think it would generate extra points for you. It would be of some benefit, but the idea was it was like this almost capture the flag style experience built in with World vs. World. And again, it didn't really work, and they didn't really ever revisit it. But it's an example of how you can take another concept and kind of overlay it with World vs. World. Am I crazy? Or do I remember something weird happening at the center of the desert Borderlands during the betas in World vs. World? Can you like fire a giant laser beam or something out of that building? Am I completely way off? Obviously we have Borderlands Bloodlust as well that we can look at. You've had the idea of the Breakout Siege events too over the years. None of these really have hit home, but I don't think that the devs should stop experimenting. And the idea of a new Borderland that has some kind of dramatic new idea for how we would capture a keep or what we'd do could totally lean into Fort Aspenwood. It's just too perfect, isn't it, really? I have my fingers crossed, and I have hope for World vs. World. I really do. Quick side comment on the video about the factions topic. Joe says, "Hey WP, I was watching a patch video from Dragonfall's release that you made, and you mentioned that Arenanet had changed the Ranger shouts to commands. Wow, that was back with Dragonfall's release? My god. Just something cool I noticed, and I wondered if you'd remembered, since Paragons were mentioned fairly recently in the videos." Yeah, I should have remembered this. I totally spaced on the idea, and it's funny as well because I'm going to be doing a Ranger, like introducing the Ranger videos soon, in which case I go over all the shouts and stuff, but they're called commands now, and that's important and exciting for people who aren't quite following the idea here, because they might add a new elite specialization. It doesn't even have to be the Paragon, it can be whatever kind of commander or whatever you like, but their new elite, their new utility skill type is called commands, and therefore when they get a new rune associated with that elite spec, it will probably modify commands in some way, which will go back and hit the Ranger, so the Ranger kind of gets a new toy. That's always been one of the more fascinating areas of buildcraft and excitement when new elite specs come in for me, but I don't know whether the devs have ever hit it quite right. I remember after Heart of Thorns came out, I did a video about the Druid runes, because Druid runes buff glyphs, and Elementalist already has glyphs, and Elementalist could heal, so it seemed like a fun kind of cross-profession combo almost, you know, in a certain sense of the word. I did a video analysing it and basically explaining why it was bad, and I remember people were a bit lukewarm about that video, like, you guys don't want to hear when something's bad, you just want to hear about when it's a good synergy, so I've never really touched on it, and POF didn't really inspire me in any way, but you never know, this new X-Pack, it might. Logan Anderson says, "I'm sad to say, but I can't imagine an implementation of anything nearly as hands-on as the Jade Quarry or the Fort Aspenwood in Guild Wars 2. I imagine there might be a small feature update to World vs. World, but in terms of faction battles, I'm not expecting more than run resources to X NPC rather than Y NPC, or if I'm being bitter, donate more T5 and T6 materials than the other team over the course of 2 weeks." Yeah, I mean, look at this cynicism. You guys really don't believe in it. I honestly think that all these concepts, and alliance battles too, can be rolled into something World vs. World related, or something out there in the open world. I do see how the donate materials thing is probably going to happen. I mean, Drizzlewood is actually fascinating, and that's what this comment makes me think of, because in a way with the whole Char Civil War and stuff, it's like we already are in this area, and we already had in Drizzlewood the idea, who do you want to support? Do you want your commendations to go to Ash Legion, or do you want them to go to Flame Legion? And obviously we were all on the same side, and maybe the expansion will shake it up a little bit, but I can imagine some of those Drizzlewood-ish systems being used for the X-Pack. And in fact, obviously, what was the main thing everyone was saying about Drizzlewood before it came out? How much they were expecting or hoping it would end up like World vs. World. And, you know, in some ways they did borrow World vs. World system. So might Drizzlewood inform an expansion map? I wouldn't be surprised. Terrafaz says, "For factions, I doubt we'll get any direct PvP, but instead we may get conflicting meta events. Think of it as a rivalry system. For example, faction A and B are both gearing up to attack an enemy formation. Both want the recognition and favour of the Emperor for winning the conflict. They have conflicting events, as only one can lead the final assault, but depending on who the players help more will determine which event carries forward. Imagine both factions have 3 prep events, and the players are competing with each other to see which completes first. Both events events could ultimately complete and both factions attack the fortification. But there would be essentially 5 states to the meta. A leads and B support, or B leads and A supports. A attacks solo, B attacks solo, or neither faction launches an attack enemy fortification thwarts their preparations. The faction that comes out ahead would give slightly more rep reward than the faction in second place. Maybe both give double if both events complete to encourage people to compete, as being on B in second place would give more than A succeeding solo. Players trying to help both would be seen as repping only the faction they have helped the most out of those involved in the event. Yeah, I can see what you're saying with this. I like the concept, and in fact, I think broadly you're just kind of talking about the idea of a rep system, and that's something Guild Wars has kind of been missing. The mastery idea kind of skirts its boundaries a little bit. You know, when Heart of Thorns comes out, which group in the jungle are you going to ally with more? But they never really quite got there, and I think this could be a good opportunity for the devs to finally look at something like that. The idea of a rep system as well, if they do it not specifically around one meta as you've described, but as kind of a broader thing that layers over the top of a lot of PvE. If they were to do that, I would actually be excited about them looking back at Corteria and adding a proper rep system for the Order of Whispers and the Dermond Priory and the Vigil, because these guys could have always had this competing kind of idea. You know, how did we want to fight Zaitan? Did we want to listen to the Priory's plan or the Vigil's plan or the Whispers plan? And you know, they could have done that open world meta event voting concept, but they never really did it much. I mean, even that's an interesting way to play with the idea that there are factions in the expansion. Just make everybody pick a side, and then when an event starts, people get to vote on, you know, whether they want to do the Kurzik idea or the Luxon idea or the Empire idea or whatever factions they might be. Because again, as I've said, I don't really like the idea of doing Kurziks versus Luxons again. But having some kind of conflict and a border, now that excites me as well. By the way, none of you guys really mentioned on the border idea, but it did strike me that it would be pretty interesting if the expansion had a border again, but it's not like a player versus player generated border, it's a player versus dragon generated border, and the idea would be that maybe a lot of the expansion can fall under control of this border, and it's sort of like what they did with Ore, you know, back at launch before mega servers, except much better, you know, fully locking off those maps that are in dragon territory until you push through them all. That would be interesting to revisit, but now that we are in a world with mega servers, I don't know how those maps could chain together. Maybe they'd have to implement some new coding or something. Speaking of the dragons, Phoenix T. Wolf says, about factions, I've been wondering about that during this current season and how it started out with a Fire and Ice Dragon icon, and now we see Primordus and Jormag at war, and we are in a way siding with Jormag. However, it does seem that there are some that would rather fight Jormag, which has made me wonder, will we in time need to choose which one to side with? Also, I've been wondering if this is going to be the Guild Wars 2 version of the Luxon versus Kurzik for the explanation, and it might be Primordus versus Jormag or 2 other dragons, and we choose which dragon we want to side with. Granted, the name End of Dragons does not fit with siding alongside one of them, but it does make me wonder. Well, look, I think to a certain extent we are expecting to be siding with a dragon, and that's Kunavang, just not necessarily an Elder Dragon, more of a lesser dragon. We're already sided with an Elder Dragon as well as it currently stands, that's Aurene. I do kind of see this. I don't think that we're going to be like allying with Primordus. What is there to ally with as far as he's concerned? It's just death and destruction, you know, some kind of temporary letting him wreak havoc to do more damage to another dragon before we cull him in again, or something like that. Maybe I can see, but I actually think that this might be a little bit deeper. I can kind of see what you're saying, but rather than we ally with one dragon versus others, maybe it's this idea of this new entity that's in the trailer that is speaking. And there's obviously a debate there, a question of philosophy there, and maybe this is where we, the players, get to decide which side of it we fall on, because maybe there's no easy or right answer, and then we're playing with that tension as we go along. But I have to say, I can't imagine the expansion being, oh, some players are Primordus followers, and some players are Jormag followers, and some players are Kunavang followers, and then there you go, there's your factions. I think really, through and through for this whole story, it's been the Free Peoples of the world versus the Elder Dragons, and I don't expect the expansion to really mess with that too much, even though we are at the end, and you know, maybe they have the liberty to do that now. And lastly, we have this big message from friggin' Paco, who says, I'll try to be succinct. I loved the factions part of factions a lot. I spent most of my time in Fort Aspenwood and Jade Quarry. I really enjoyed Alliance battles a ton back in the day. I occasionally go back on the weekends to play Fort Aspenwood even now. Sadly, I don't think modern day Arenanet will be likely to bring it back in a real capacity that would be commensurate to their current sensibilities of having everyone on the same side. Especially for the narrative purpose of fighting the dragons. It would essentially be a distraction, meaning why are we suddenly squabbling amongst ourselves when Bubbles is causing a ruckus or something. Outside of the narrative, I still think this aspect of Arenanet to not focus on interplayer conflict outside of these designated zones means that they likely won't see that same idea explored in a PvE map. Even if it's just one PvE map where there's a no man's land where you can attack a player with an opposing faction, aka a sliver of the RuneScape wilderness. Even if I would totally be on board with it, I know that players zerg a ton, and I have a hard time seeing them balance something of that nature. To be clear though, I think it would be best implemented as an instance a la Guild Wars 1, where you could do a timed arena, bonus points if it's a location you access out in the PvE world and not in the PvP lobby, to make it feel more contiguous and immersive. I just don't know how much modern Arenanet would be disposed to attempt something like this when they want everyone to play nice. War and conflict happen in and out of fantasy, but it could be ill received by the less combat prone players in the game. Well, I think that you're actually very intelligent here. I think that they do have a line in the sand of everyone being on the same side and people playing nice, so to speak. I really think that Arenanet pride themselves on the fact they built an MMO where player conflict is very minimal, and the wheels have been greased so much that quite often people just slide on by each other without paying any attention, and that means there's no conflict, there's no griefing out in the open world, and I think they really love that, and I think they wouldn't want to tamper with that in any way. So yeah, I think the odds are kind of low. What's really would be the best thing here is if I had faith that they really believed in PvP. Now, I said earlier in this video that it hasn't been neglected, but do I really believe they care about like esports and pushing it and all that kind of stuff? I don't. And if I really believe that they had a lot of faith in world versus world and they really wanted it to be one of the predominant things people are doing, which I don't. If I believe those things, I think the best way that they could handle this is to have the expansion be paired with big initiatives for those two areas, and that's about as far as they need to go. You still have the PvP stuff and the player conflict stuff in those designated areas of the game, it's just that they have their own stuff going on. You know, a bunch of new PvP maps are a big part of this expansion. A really huge amount of stuff for world versus world is a big part of this expansion. In particular, getting alliances in at long last, they tie with the expansion, as well as a new Borderland, as well as, you know, revamped Edge of the Mist or whatever. If all of that stuff was just added at the same time, I think they could easily lean into the idea of factions or whatever without ever tampering with PvE whatsoever. But as it stands, I don't really believe they'll do that. I do think that if they did something to lean into factions, it would be a PvE oriented idea, and the question is just what. And here, I have to say to you as well, the idea that they won't explore it at all and that it's just unworkable outside of an instance, I don't know. I think it is workable with what we saw at Drakkar. I really do think that the random little PvP moments we have there are worthwhile, and we've seen them push the boundaries in lots of other little ways, particularly through adventures and stuff like that. So maybe it's just a matter of doing stuff in small amounts. And here's the other argument I really want to make to you guys. You might say that the whole everyone on the same side thing is purely a gameplay philosophy, but I actually think as well it's been a big narrative philosophy. But that's been a big thing for the first stuff in Guild Wars 2 when it's all been about the dragons. If we're really sitting here now in early 2021 believing that this game is going to have a whole new era in which it's not about the dragons, about something else, surely at that point this thing will be reassessed, right? Surely at that point, when we're looking at more personal conflicts, they'll be looking to make a change up like this, right? So maybe you won't see it at the start of End of Dragons, but maybe in the season immediately following. There's a lot more to say on this, but my throat's a little bit sore. I've just recorded 2 of these back to back, so thank you very much for watching, guys. I hope you enjoy. If you want to catch the next episode right now, it's already live on Patreon. And as for the next topic, I've got a kind of a broad idea. Let's do an episode on lore, like literally just anything story related. Drop me your comments down below, anything to do with the story. Really, it can be any big topic, any small topic, things you would like to see be resolved in End of Dragons, and I'll give you some of my thoughts on that. So let's see how a lore episode goes. Thanks everybody, I'll see you there for that very soon. Take it easy and have a great one.